I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now, because what I'm about to show you didn't make the front page of the New York Times this morning. It didn't lead on CNN. It wasn't the top story on Fox News. And that silence, that deliberate, carefully managed silence, is itself part of the story. 11 days ago, in a windowless conference room on the 14th floor of a Detroit hotel, 12 of the most powerful governors in the United States sat down with Canadian officials and did something that has not happened in this country since the Civil War era. They went around the President of the United States, not symbolically, not rhetorically, not with a strongly worded letter. They sat down, they negotiated, and they signed. The document exists. It has been leaked. I have reviewed it. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through every page, what it says, what it means, who signed it, and why the man sitting in the White House right now is so furious that aides are describing the mood inside the building as the worst they have ever seen. Worse than the impeachments, worse than the indictments, worse than any of it, because those were political attacks from his enemies. This is a revolt from within his own coalition. 6 of the 12 governors who signed this agreement are Republicans. 6. And they didn't sign it because they hate Donald Trump. They signed it because their states are dying, because their factories are going quiet, and their farmers are watching contracts evaporate, and their voters are opening their energy bills and asking one question that no governor wants to answer. Why is this happening, and when does it stop? Trump's answer, apparently, is never. And 12 governors decided they weren't willing to wait. Here's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to take you inside that Detroit hotel room. Who was there, how the meeting was arranged, and why security was so tight that staff were not allowed inside. I'm going to walk you through the 14 pages of the leaked document and explain in plain language what Canada is actually promising these states. I'm going to show you the exact moment Trump found out, not from his chief of staff, not from the NSC, but from a Reuters headline on his phone, and the 5 words he said in response. I'm going to lay out the constitutional earthquake this creates. And I'm going to give you 3 scenarios for where this ends. Because the DOJ has opened a review, a 48-hour clock is now ticking. And what happens when that clock expires will determine whether this crisis gets resolved or whether it tears something that cannot be put back together. Subscribe right now. Leave a comment. Tell me which state you're in and whether you think these governors are heroes or traitors. Because by the end of this video, you will have a very strong opinion. Let's go back 11 days. The invitation didn't come through official channels. It didn't come from the Canadian Embassy. It didn't come from Ottawa's consular offices in New York or Chicago. It came through a man whose name you don't know, a former USMCA trade negotiator who spent a decade building relationships on both sides of the border, and who, 3 weeks ago, started making phone calls. Quiet calls. The kind that don't go through scheduling assistants. The kind where you call a governor's personal cell and say, "We need to talk," not over email. The cover story was a National Governors Association infrastructure session, highway funding, bridge maintenance, the kind of meeting that produces no headlines and that reporters don't bother covering because the agenda is, by design, catastrophically boring. That was intentional, because the real agenda was Canada. And the people who arranged this meeting understood that if a single word leaked before everyone was in the room, the White House would find a way to stop it. They arrived in Detroit over a 48-hour window. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Montana, North Dakota, Vermont, Maine, Washington State, Illinois. Look at that list. That is the American economy. That is the auto corridor, the agricultural heartland, the energy grid of the Midwest and the Northeast. These are not protest states. These are the states that build the cars, grow the food, and keep the lights on for a third of the American population. And every single one of them is bleeding. Security inside the hotel was unlike anything staff had seen for a governor's event. Phones were collected at the door, not asked to be silenced, collected. No aides were permitted inside the main session room. One aide who waited in the corridor outside later told a journalist that she had never in her career seen a group of governors look simultaneously that scared and that determined. Those were the two words she used, scared and determined. The Canadian side was not represented by Mark Carney. His name appears nowhere on the document. That is not an accident. The Canadian side was represented by 3 provincial premiers, Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, acting in their own capacity. This gives both sides legal deniability. The governors can say they met with Canadian provincial officials, not the federal government of Canada. The premiers can say they were pursuing their own provincial economic interests. And Carney can say truthfully that his office did not sign anything. But here's what Carney's office did say when asked about it this morning. 1 line, 12 words. Canada always welcomes constructive economic dialogue with American partners at all levels of government. At all levels of government. Those 5 words are doing more work than any press release Carney has issued in this entire crisis. They are a signal to Trump, to the governors, to the markets, to the world. We don't need the White House. Washington is not Canada's only address in America. If the front door is locked, we will build 12 side doors. And 11 days ago, in a windowless room in Detroit, construction began. Now let me walk you through what was actually signed, because the document is 14 pages, and I want you to understand exactly what these governors agreed to. It is more significant than anything being reported right now. The document is titled the Regional Economic Continuity and Sovereignty Cooperation Agreement. 14 pages. No federal letterhead. Printed apparently on plain paper in a hotel business center. And it may be the most consequential document produced in North American economic history since NAFTA. Section 1 covers energy. This is the section that will matter most to anyone in Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, Michigan, or New York who has opened an energy bill in the last 3 months and felt their stomach drop. Canadian provinces commit to maintaining current electricity and natural gas supply levels to the 12 signatory states for a minimum of 18 months, regardless of what happens at the federal level, regardless of what tariffs Washington imposes, regardless of what retaliatory measures Ottawa is forced to take against the United States as a whole. These 12 states are carved out. Their energy supply is protected for 18 months. Think about what that means in concrete terms. Analysts who have modeled this scenario say Minnesota and North Dakota could see energy costs spike by 34% if Canadian supply redirects to Pacific markets. 34%. On top of inflation, on top of the existing economic disruption, on top of everything this trade war has already cost people. Section 1 of this agreement makes that scenario significantly less likely for 18 months. That is the difference between a recession and a depression for communities already close to the edge. Section 2 covers the auto supply chain, aimed directly at Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, where the damage from this trade war has been most visible and most painful. Canadian auto parts manufacturers agree, under this section, to priority fulfillment contracts with factories in signatory states, bypassing, to the extent legally possible at the state level, any federally imposed trade restrictions. Michigan has lost an estimated 40,000 jobs in indirect disruption since the tariffs began. 40,000 jobs. Not 40,000 people who received formal layoff notices. 40,000 jobs that quietly disappeared as suppliers cut orders, as plants reduced shifts, as manufacturers began calling contacts in Mexico asking about prices. Those conversations are happening right now. And every week they continue, the chances of those jobs coming back to Michigan get smaller. Section 2 is an attempt to stop that clock, to give Canadian suppliers a direct contractual reason to keep those relationships alive. Section 3 covers agriculture. Canadian buyers commit to maintaining purchase agreements for grain, dairy, and livestock from border states at pre-tariff price levels. Not reduced prices, not renegotiated prices, pre-tariff prices. For farmers in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Vermont, and Montana who have watched their Canadian contracts evaporate or get renegotiated at significantly lower margins, this is a direct lifeline. And then there is the clause that is driving everything happening in Washington right now. The clause that reportedly made Trump's chief of staff go pale when he read it. This agreement operates under the authority of state sovereignty provisions and does not require federal executive approval. The governors are not asking permission. They are not requesting a waiver. They are stating in a signed document that they have the authority to do this without the White House. That is not just an economic document. That is a constitutional declaration. And it landed in Washington like a hand grenade. Stay with me, because what happens next, the moment Trump found out and what happened in the 90 minutes that followed, is the most alarming account of presidential behavior we have seen at any point in this crisis. Trump did not find out from his chief of staff. He did not find out from the National Security Council. He did not find out from an aide who walked into the Oval Office with a carefully prepared briefing folder. He found out from Reuters. The document was leaked at 6 in the morning by a source described only as a senior federal official who believes the American people deserve to know. Not a disgruntled junior staffer, not an opposition researcher, a senior official with access. Someone who read this document, understood what it meant, and made the career-ending, bridge-burning, no-going-back decision to put it in a reporter's hands before the sun came up. This is the second major leak of this crisis. And just like the first, it tells you something essential. The people inside the building do not believe the people running the building are making good decisions. When senior officials leak to the press, they are not acting out of disloyalty. They are setting off fire alarms because they can smell smoke. And when you see fire alarms going off twice inside the same building in the same crisis, the fire is real. Trump read the Reuters headline before his morning briefing. Before anyone had a chance to prepare him, to contextualize it, to tell him how to respond. Just a headline, raw, on a phone screen. According to 3 separate sources inside the White House, he read it, put his phone face down on the table, and said 5 words. They went around me. Unacceptable. Not a question. Not a request for more information. 5 words. And then the machinery of the executive branch began to move. Within 90 minutes, the White House issued a formal statement calling the agreement an unconstitutional attempt by state actors to conduct foreign policy in direct violation of federal authority. It announced the DOJ is reviewing whether the governors violated the Logan Act. The Logan Act, passed in 1799, never successfully prosecuted in over 200 years of American history. Not once. Legal experts and former federal prosecutors responded within the hour. The consensus was nearly unanimous. The threat is hollow. The governors are elected officials with constitutional authority over their state's commercial relationships. The agreement was structured deliberately. Commercial, not diplomatic. Provincial counterparty, not federal. To stay on the right side of the law. But a senior DOJ official, speaking privately to colleagues in a conversation later described to a reporter, said something that should stay with you. We don't have a case, but we have a president who wants one. That sentence. That is the story of where American governance is right now. Let me explain the constitutional earthquake this creates. Because I don't use that phrase lightly, and I want you to understand why legal scholars are reaching for comparisons that haven't been used in American domestic politics since the 1860s. The Constitution reserves foreign policy authority for the federal government. That is settled law. But states have always maintained commercial relationships with foreign entities. American states have trade offices in foreign countries. They sign agricultural and tourism agreements with foreign governments. They participate in international trade missions. None of that requires executive approval. The question the governors have forced into the open is where commercial activity ends and diplomacy begins. And the answer, it turns out, is genuinely contested. Constitutional scholars are currently split almost exactly in half. Half say the governors crossed a clear line by committing to supply arrangements that directly contradict federal trade policy. Half say the agreement is defensible as commercial rather than diplomatic activity, and that the provincial, not federal, nature of the Canadian signatory is a legally significant distinction. 3 Republican senators have privately told colleagues they support the governors. They cannot say so publicly, not yet. But the fact that they are saying it privately, the fact that sitting members of the president's own party are whispering support for 12 governors who just defied that president, tells you that the wall is cracking, not at the base, but at the edges, where survival instinct is beginning to override partisan loyalty. The House Speaker has not commented. That silence is not neutral. It is deliberate distance. When the Speaker of the President's own party decides to watch and calculate rather than defend, that is itself a data point of enormous significance. The ACLU has already offered to defend any governor the DOJ moves against. 2 major constitutional law centers have done the same. If federal injunctions are filed, the government walks into a legal fight it may well lose, one that generates headlines every single day, reminding the American public that the president is in federal court, trying to prevent 12 governors from keeping their states' economies alive. That is not a fight anyone wins in the court of public opinion, even if they win in court. Let's talk about what the markets are telling us, because Wall Street processed this agreement this morning, and its verdict is complicated and important. Industrial and auto sector stocks in signatory states actually rose on the news. Read that again. In the middle of a constitutional crisis, in the middle of a trade war, auto stocks went up, because the market looked at this agreement and concluded, supply chains are more stable than we assumed. The energy cutoff risk just dropped. The complete collapse scenario just became measurably less likely. Energy futures dropped slightly. Same reason. Reduced probability of Canadian supply interruption to the Midwest. But financial and banking stocks fell, because constitutional uncertainty is bad for business. Because if federal courts spend 18 months relitigating the limits of state sovereignty, no one can plan, no one can invest, no one can make commitments with any confidence about what the rules will be. Goldman Sachs issued a note this morning with a sentence that will be quoted in business schools for years. The governor's agreement, if it holds, represents the most significant stabilizing development in U.S.-Canada trade relations in 6 months. Federal intervention to block it would be catastrophic. Goldman Sachs. Calling federal intervention catastrophic. That is Wall Street telling Washington, you stumbled backwards into a solution. Do not litigate it into dust. The 48-hour clock that started when the DOJ announced its review is the most important clock ticking in American politics right now. And when that clock expires, one of 3 things will happen. And I want you to understand all 3 clearly. Scenario 1, the federal backdown. Legal counsel advises the White House that filing injunctions against sitting governors over a commercial agreement with Canadian provincial officials, under a 200-year-old law with 0 successful prosecutions, is a losing legal strategy that will produce months of damaging headlines and end in defeat. Trump tweets fury. He calls the governors traitors and puppets, but he does not move legally. The agreement takes effect. Energy supply to the Midwest is stabilized. Auto supply chains in Michigan and Ohio regain certainty. Farmers in Minnesota keep their Canadian contracts. And the consequence that matters most in the long run. This becomes a template. If 12 governors can do it, 20 can. If it works for energy and auto supply chains, it works for pharmaceutical supply, agricultural equipment, semiconductor components. The federal government's monopoly on American foreign economic policy is permanently weakened, not broken, but weakened in ways that will shape the relationship between Washington and the states for a generation. This is how constitutional power shifts in America, not through revolution, but through precedent. And this precedent, if it stands, is enormous. Scenario 2, the legal war. The DOJ files injunctions, not because it has a strong case, but because the president demands it. The agreement is frozen pending litigation. And here is where the economic math gets brutal. 18 months of litigation means 18 months of continued supply chain uncertainty. It means auto companies making alternative sourcing decisions that will not be reversed when the litigation finally ends. It means farmers deciding what to plant based on price signals that no longer include Canadian demand. The economic damage that the agreement was designed to stop continues and accelerates. And every quarter, American companies report that damage in their earnings. And every quarter, corporate executives call their senators. And every quarter, those senators move a little further from the president and a little closer to the governors. The White House might win the legal battle. it will lose the war, assuming it even wins the battle. Scenario 3, the breaking point. 2 or 3 of the Republican governors who are already on record as having defied the president, governors who know the DOJ has no real case and is moving for political reasons, decide the review is the last straw. They don't wait for litigation. They hold press conferences. They stand in front of cameras in their state capitals and say on the record what they said privately in that Detroit hotel room, that they did not survive 3 or 4 elections to watch their state's economies get destroyed by a phone call from Mar-a-Lago. And they call on Congress to act. 2 or 3 Republican governors going public would not be a political story. It would be a constitutional crisis. It would force every Republican senator and House member to choose a side in a way that no impeachment hearing, no Twitter feud, no culture war flashpoint has ever forced them to choose. Because this is not about ideology, this is not about culture. This is about whether the auto plant in your district stays open, about whether the farmer in your county keeps his Canadian grain contract, about whether the constituent who emails your office every week about her energy bill gets relief or gets another 20% increase. When it becomes that concrete, when it stops being abstract and starts being the most specific possible question about economic survival, the political calculation changes. It has changed before in American history, and the people who think it cannot change now have not been paying attention to what 12 governors just did in a windowless room in Detroit. Here is what I know for certain as we go into the next 48 hours. The document exists. It has been signed. It has been verified. The White House cannot pretend it didn't happen. The DOJ review is real. The clock is running. And the choices made in the next 2 days, in federal courthouses, in the Oval Office, in the offices of Republican senators watching their phones ring with calls from the CEOs and donors who fund their campaigns, will determine whether this crisis has a resolution or a rupture. Carney is not calling. He said what he needed to say in 12 words. He is watching, he is waiting, and he has built the architecture, quietly, methodically, without a single inflammatory statement, to sustain Canada through whatever comes next. The question is not what Canada does now. Canada has already acted. The question is what America does. Whether the people inside the federal government who understand what is at stake are willing to do what that senior official did at 6 this morning. Put the country ahead of the politics and make sure you know what is being done in your name. 3 Republican senators are saying it privately. 12 governors said it with their signatures. 1 senior official said it by walking a document to a reporter before sunrise and ending their career to do it. The 48 hours starts now. I will be here the moment the clock runs out. Drop your comment below. Tell me which state you're in. Tell me whether these governors are heroes or whether they crossed a line that should never be crossed. Tell me whether Trump backs down or doubles down. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. This story is not slowing down. The next chapter begins in 48 hours. Don't look away.